Picture yourself arriving in Chicago for the event of the century. You've booked a room in an elegant hotel, close to the exposition. The owner greets you with a disarming smile. He walks you to your room. The door closes, and from that moment on, no one would ever hear from you again. This is not a made-up story. It really happened in Chicago in 1893, and his name was Henry Howard Holmes. Today, I'm going to tell you how this monster stayed hidden for years, right in plain sight, and how a stupid mistake worth $500 brought it all crashing down. Chicago, 1893. The city hosted the world's Columbian Exposition. Over 27 million visitors passed through in 6 months, nearly half the entire American population of the time. It was the year of progress, of electricity, brought to a public space for the very first time, of wonder. But a few miles from the fairgrounds, a man was building something completely different. In this video, we're going to cover everything. Who H.H. Holmes really was, how he built his castle of death, how he was caught, what happened to him in the end. His real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, born on May 16, 1861, in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. A well-off family, a childhood that, at least on the surface, seemed normal. But even as a child, something was off. One day, school bullies dragged him into the local doctor's office to frighten him with a skeleton. The effect was the exact opposite of what they expected. Mudgett stood there, staring at those bones for minutes on end. Fascinated, almost hypnotized. That fixed stare at the skeleton, that fascination was the starting point of everything. And what came next was even more disturbing. From that day on, he started bringing animals home to study them. It wasn't scientific curiosity. It was something else entirely. He was already showing signs as a child, and nobody noticed. In a little while, you'll understand why that is the most disturbing detail in this entire story. Mudgett enrolled at the University of Michigan School of Medicine. At night, when the campus was deserted, he broke into the anatomy lab. He stole the cadavers. He mutilated them, burned their faces, broke the bones, made them unrecognizable. Then he took them outside, planted them in strategic locations, and had them discovered as accident victims. Before they were found, he had already taken out life insurance policies in their names. The dead earned him more than the living ever could. Hold on. This wasn't a kid stealing to survive. He was 21 years old and had already built a system, a metheny. And he hadn't even finished his second year of medical school. He graduated in June 1884. His family was convinced he was about to become a respectable physician. Over the following 2 years, he left a trail of scandals, frauds, and at least one suspicious disappearance between New York and Philadelphia. Then he changed his name, from Herman Mudgett to Henry Howard Holmes. A new name, a new city, a new story. In August 1886, he arrived in Chicago. That's where everything changed. And when you see what he built there, you'll understand why his story still sends shivers down people's spines 130 years later. In Chicago, Holmes found work at a pharmacy in Englewood, a neighborhood on the city's south side. The owner was a woman named Elizabeth Holton. Holmes convinced her to hand over the business. Then she disappeared. Holmes said she had gone to California to stay with relatives. Nobody looked into it. This was the first disappearance. Not the first confirmed victim, but the first signal. Holmes made people vanish and always had a convincing explanation ready. Always. In 1890, the U.S. Congress awarded Chicago the right to host the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Millions of visitors would be pouring in from around the world. Thousands of people in need of somewhere to stay. Holmes saw an opportunity, but not the one you're thinking of. He purchased a plot of land on West 63rd Street in Englewood, about 4 miles from the fairgrounds, close enough to intercept visitors, far enough to stay out of sight. Construction started in 1887. In 1892, he added a 3rd floor, using the fair as an excuse to create a hotel for visitors. But what he was building was not a hotel. In just a minute, we're going inside that building, and I promise you won't see it coming. Holmes simply called his building the castle. The press, years later, would call it something very different. The Murder Castle. 3 floors, over 100 rooms, shops on the ground floor, apartments on the first, guest rooms on the second. Holmes personally oversaw every phase of construction using one very deliberate method. He changed construction crews every few weeks. Why? Because no single worker could ever see the full picture. Each one built his small piece. Only Holmes knew how it all fit together. He never paid a single cent to any of the builders. They took him to court over 50 times. For him, it was a doubly convenient system. Build for free and keep the secret. The guest rooms had doors that could only be locked from the outside, not from the inside you walked in. The door closed. You couldn't open it anymore. The walls of some rooms were lined with thick, insulating material, soundproof. No one could hear what happened inside. And that's just the upper floors. What Holmes built in the basement is even harder to believe. We're going down there right now. Some of the castle's rooms had something very unusual about them. Pipes connected to a central valve in his private office. These were not water pipes, they were gas lines. Holmes could open that valve at any moment, without leaving his office, while the victim lay sleeping, without getting close, without getting his hands dirty, without leaving a mark. Think about the ingenuity behind this system. He was not an impulsive criminal, he was an engineer of murder. And the worst of it is in the basement, which is where we're headed right now. In the basement, Holmes had installed a cremation furnace, large enough to hold an adult body, vats of acid to dissolve whatever remained, vats of quicklime to speed up decomposition, an operating table with restraint straps, precision surgical instruments. Each item on this list is not a grim detail for its own sake. It is proof that Holmes had designed a system to eliminate every last trace. And now comes the final piece, the most chilling of all. And then there was the secret chute, a concealed shaft built into the walls that connected the second-floor guest rooms directly to the basement, wide enough for a human body, angled just right so that it slid down on its own. The guest walked into the room. They never walked out, and they descended, unseen by anyone, straight to where Holmes was waiting. Holmes designed every single inch of this system. But the question everyone asks is, how did he lure his victims in? The answer is simpler and more disturbing than you might think. Holmes was selective and very patient. His preferred victims were young women. They came to Chicago for the exposition. They were looking for work, a place to stay, a fresh start, and Holmes was right there waiting for them. His method never changed. First, he charmed them. He was brilliant, attentive, elegant. Then he offered them a job at his shop or a room in the castle at rock-bottom prices. And then he asked for just one thing. Take out a life insurance policy. With me as the beneficiary, it's just a formality. He repeated that line dozens of times, in a calm voice, with that smile, and it worked every single time, because no one could have imagined what it really meant. Among his most likely victims, Julia Connor, his employee, and her daughter Pearl, who was 5 years old. Emmeline Sigrand, his secretary. Minnie Williams, who had signed over her entire inheritance to him before vanishing. Real women with names, families, dreams, gone without a trace. None of them was ever found. The cremation furnace was efficient, and that the not knowing is perhaps the hardest part of this entire story to accept. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, then raised the number to over 130, then reduced it again. Historians' estimates range from 9 confirmed victims to over 200. The truth will never be known. Do you know what the most disturbing part is? While all of this was happening, Holmes was beloved by his community. How did he manage it? I'll tell you right now. What made Holmes so disturbing was not just what he did, it was how he managed to hide it. Because while he was running his killing machine, Holmes was regarded as a pillar of the community. Everyone he met was won over. Women found him irresistible. Businessmen found him reliable. The neighbors admired him. His pharmacy customers adored him. A neighbor interviewed after the arrest said, "He was the kindest man I had ever met." I could not believe it. That was the power of Holmes. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like your best friend. This is the classic profile of what we now call primary psychopathy. A complete absence of empathy. No remorse at all, but an extraordinary ability to simulate both. And while he played the part of the respectable gentleman, his private life was even more brazen. For wives, all at the same time, without any of them knowing about the others. Holmes married 4 times over the course of his life, without ever divorcing any of them. His first wife was Clara Lovering. They married in 1878. when he was 17. Together, they had a son, Robert. In 1887, still married to Clara, he married Myrta Belknap in Minneapolis. Together, they had a daughter, Lucy. 2 families, 2 lives, 2 women who knew nothing of each other, and he moved calmly between New Hampshire and Chicago as if nothing were out of the ordinary. But it didn't stop there. In 1893, he lived with Minnie Williams, presenting her as his wife. Minnie disappeared shortly afterwards. In January 1894, in Denver, he married Georgiana Yoke, while still legally married to all 3 of the previous women. 4 parallel lives, 4 sealed compartments. And he was the only one who knew all the corridors, just like his castle. But the most staggering thing is what happened during the fair, when he had millions of potential victims at his disposal and the whole city was too distracted to notice anything. May 1st, 1893. Chicago opened the world's Columbian Exposition. Over 27 million visitors would pass through the gates over 6 months. On average, 150,000 people every single day. Among them was John Davis from Greenville, Pennsylvania. He had traveled for days to see the fair. He found an affordable place to stay near the exposition, a hotel run by a kind and reliable doctor. John Davis never went home. In 1920, his daughter petitioned to have him declared legally dead. We don't know what Holmes said to John that evening. We don't know which room he ended up in. We only know he walked in and never walked out. During this period, Holmes worked at an industrial pace. He selected, seduced, insured, killed, and erased, with the same calm composure as a doctor seeing patients. Outside, a few miles away, the city was celebrating progress, electric light, and the future. Inside the castle, someone was burning in the basement furnace, and nobody suspected a thing. But every story has a breaking point. Holmes's began in an almost ridiculous way. Not with a murder, but with a petty scam. I'm telling you right now. July 1894. Holmes was arrested for the first time, not for murder, for selling mortgaged goods in St. Louis, Missouri. In jail, he struck up a conversation with a fellow inmate named Marion Hedgepeth. Hedgepeth was a notorious Far West train robber, a man who knew his way around crime. Think about the irony. Holmes, the man who had deceived hundreds of people, was about to be betrayed by a Far West outlaw over a matter of $500. Keep watching. Holmes put a deal on the table. Find me a trustworthy lawyer. In exchange, I'll give you $500. The goal, orchestrate a $10,000 insurance fraud by faking his own death. Hedgepeth agreed. He named a lawyer. Holmes was released on bail. But then he never paid Hedgepeth. A fatal mistake. An enraged Hedgepeth went to the police, and what he told the investigators set off a manhunt that would span the entire country. Hedgepeth told the investigators everything he knew about Holmes. He spoke of a $10,000 life insurance policy taken out in the name of one Benjamin Petessel, Holmes's associate. Petessel had been declared dead in an alleged accident in Philadelphia. Holmes had already collected the payout, but when investigators re-examined the case, they understood. Petessel had not faked his death. Petessel had actually been murdered. The police realized they were dealing with something far bigger than a simple fraud. They started digging, and the deeper they dug, the worse it got. The police started pulling the thread, and the thread led to Chicago. Holmes, meanwhile, was already on the run. He moved across several U.S. states and Canada, taking with him 3 of Petessel's 5 children: Alice, 14 years old, Nellie, 12 years old, and Howard, 10. He killed them one by one during the flight. Howard on October 10th, 1894, in Indianapolis. Alice and Nellie on October 25th, in Toronto. 3 children killed during the flight, and he moved calmly from city to city. Then the Pinkerton Agency tracked him down. And that was the end. November 17th, 1894. Holmes was arrested in Boston by the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. In July 1895, immediately after the bodies of the Peterselli girls were found in Toronto, Chicago police and reporters began investigating Holmes's building. The investigators walked into the building not knowing what they would find. Then they went down into the basement. Human bones, skull fragments, blood-stained instruments, the cremation furnace, still operational. But there were also details no one had expected. Under the basement stairs, a large ball of women's hair. Inside the furnace, a woman's gold shoe chain and burned dress buttons, later identified as belonging to Minnie Williams. In a chimney flue, the bones of a child, believed to be Pearl Connor, who had disappeared in 1891, aged 5. Enough remains to confirm at least 9 victims with certainty. The traces of many others had been so thoroughly destroyed that the total number of people who died inside those walls would never be known. The news exploded. Chicago was in shock. The entire country was in shock. Now, you know what he did. You know how he was caught. One question remains. What happened to him? The trial, the confession, the execution. I'm going to tell you everything, down to the last detail. The trial opened on October 28, 1895, in Philadelphia. The main charge, the murder of Benjamin Petesil. Holmes handled part of his own defense with that same calm, that same charm. But this time, it didn't work. On November 2nd, 1895, the verdict came guilty, sentenced to death by hanging. 6 days. Holmes had spent years building the castle, had deceived hundreds of people, had killed at least 9 of them, and it only took 6 days to condemn him. But even now, he had one last plan. He sold his story to the Hearst newspaper syndicate for $7,500. Even facing death, he was still thinking about business. In the confession, he admitted to 27 murders. Then he raised the number to over 130. Then he brought it back down. Historians and investigators agree he was most likely exaggerating for publicity and to create confusion. But there is one line in that confession, a line about himself that has echoed through history ever since. I'm reading it to you in a minute. May 7th, 1896. Philadelphia, Moyamensing Prison. Holmes was 34 years old, 9 days away from his birthday. He was calm, almost serene. He showed no fear, no anxiety, no remorse. Before his death, he had written these exact words in his confession, words that have never been forgotten. I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing. That line is not a confession of guilt. It is something far more disturbing. It is a justification, as if killing were an art form, as if he had simply been born that way. The trapdoor opened, but Holmes's neck did not snap cleanly. The rope held him suspended. He died slowly, over 15 minutes, by strangulation. The witnesses present in the room described a complete silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Before his death, he had made one final request, to be buried in a concrete-filled coffin 10 feet underground. He said he was afraid someone might dissect his body, exactly what he had done to his victims. His wish was granted. He was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Pennsylvania. The story didn't end with his death, because what happened to the castle afterwards is equally unsettling. Stay for one more minute. The murder castle did not burn down with Holmes. In August 1895, a fire damaged its upper floors, but the building stayed standing. It remained there in the Englewood neighborhood for another 43 years. People walked past it every day. They knew what had happened inside. No one wanted to go in. No one wanted to tear it down. In 1938, it was finally demolished. In its place, the federal government built a post office. Today, if you walk to the corner of 63rd Street and South Wallace Avenue in Chicago, you find a yellow brick building with an eagle carved above the entrance. No sign, no plaque, no memorial, as if nothing had ever happened there. But there is one thing that cannot be erased. The castle's caretaker was a man named Patrick Quinlan. 4 years he had lived in that building, had heard things, had seen things, and he had said nothing. In 1914, nearly 20 years after Holmes's execution, he was found dead in his bed. He had poisoned himself with strychnine. He had left a note. I could not sleep. If this video kept you watching till the end, the next video we've put together for you will make it even harder to sleep. And if you don't want to miss the next stories, subscribing to the channel is just one click away.